All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Chris Carberry, CEO of Explore Mars. Welcome to our second Humans to Mars seminar called Managing Isolation in Space and on Earth. Obviously, this is a particularly relevant topic during our current crisis. Before I introduce today's moderator, I just have a few short announcements. First of all, if you haven't checked it out yet, Explore Mars is co-hosting Janet Ivey's online astronaut academy weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Janet Ivey has put together an extraordinary student programming. Even if you don't have kids, it's worth tuning in. Just a reminder, the Humans to Mars Summit is now taking place on August 31st to September 1st at the National Academy of Sciences building in Washington, D.C. Registration and other details will be announced soon. And I should also note that we'll be acknowledging all of our H2M sponsors and partners all the way up until H2M, including Aerojet Rocketdyne, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, ULA, Paragon, NDA, National Institute of Aerospace, Science and Entertainment Exchange, and many others. We'll highlight all of them in the upcoming weeks. I should also note that we'll be announcing our next H2M webinar within the next couple of days, so we hope you can join us, next week as well. However, you didn't tune in to hear me, so I'd like to introduce you to the moderator of our session today, Sonya Gavankar, the host of the Tech Show and longtime television reporter. Those of you who attended H2M last year may recall that Sonya also co-hosted our live stream interviews along with Matt Kaplan. So Sonya, welcome and thanks for agreeing to moderate today's session.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. When you get asked to interview really smart people from the comfort of your own home and you get to wear pajama bottoms, it's a yes. It's an automatic yes. So I'm glad to be here. I self-quarantined on the 17th of March, and after about the first week, I was starting to get stressed out, and then I had that memory of seeing those astronauts 50 years ago in an Airstream, a tiny little Airstream, and I thought, well, this isn't so bad. You're just quarantining like an astronaut. So I've sort of been going with that mindset in the hopes of pushing me into the right frame of mind to be staying healthy, but also be thinking about how I could use this time wisely. So I'm really happy to have this conversation with our panel of experts. We have Dr. Susan Ip-Jewell, the president and co-founder of Mars Academy USA, John Hanachek, CEO and co-founder, Avatar Medic, and Scott Kelly, former NASA astronaut, author of Endurance. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining us from the comfort of your homes. And I want to remind all of you also, especially on our panel, to unmute your microphones because you have wisdom to drop and I want to hear it all. And thanks to you guys for doing the fancy backgrounds. I was thinking of also doing a fancy background, and I thought people who actually do science and who have been in space have fancier backgrounds. I'll let you guys do it. So welcome to my dining room. Again, thank you for having us and for joining us. We're going to be taking questions at the end of our conversation. We're going to start with our three panelists who are going to be giving brief 5-minute-ish presentations. Then we'll ask some questions and then go to your questions. So make sure you're asking them on all of the chat platforms that you're using. We'll be compiling them. I'm going to start with Dr. Susan Ip-Jewell. Dr. Susan, what would you like to share with us to kick this off?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sonya. Thank you, Explore Mars, Chris, and the team for inviting me. And hello, everybody. It's a wonderful honor and pleasure to be here and to share some of the work that myself and my team and our organization are doing with regards to space exploration. And today, because it's isolation and space and managing human health on Earth and beyond, I will focus primarily on space medicine and the medical technology that I think would not only enable us as a human race to go back into space and probably become a multiplanetary species back to the moon and then down to Mars, onwards to Mars, within our lifetime. I also am very interested to talk a little bit about how this journey of discovery, technology that we're working on would also apply to help us to improve life on Earth. And particularly at this particular moment with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic and the isolation aspect of, of the work that we do. And of course, we've got wonderful NASA astronaut Scott Kelly, who actually have been on a long duration time spent in isolation on the International Space Station. So with that as an introduction, maybe you could show the first slide. So for the work that I'm in, is that I'm very interested in technology, but specifically how to do R&D, research and development, innovation in a laboratory, not in a standard laboratory of inside a building, but outside in the natural environment on Earth, right? So we consider ourselves as analog astronauts versus a sort of quote unquote real astronaut like, Scott, who will talk about that. And I'm so interested to hear his experience on the International Space Station. But as analog astronauts, really, we are focused on, living and working on a planetary surface in the future. But really, the idea is a model or paradigm of a lab in the environment. And for me, I'm interested in not just doing the human factors, but I'm interested in really focusing on the medical side and particularly space medicine, and also mental health and wellness. So my background is also in integrative medicine and personalized medicine. And how do we apply those concepts, those paradigms, those ideas to bring it into remote, isolated, confined environments of space, and one day on the surface of an off-world planet, Moon and Mars, but also here on Earth, where there are areas that we will consider to be called analog environments because of some feature of that environment that has some similarity to Mars or the Moon, or to microgravity there on the International Space Station. So, for example, here, so I think for the last 10 years or so, what I wanted to do was, with all my eclectic background, I wanted to bring all that into a vision, and this is where it manifested. And it had many transformation over the, not spring chicken, over the decades. I've been doing the medicine and innovation for nearly 20, 30 years. So, but this manifestation of bringing in astronautics, analog astronautics as a field, as an educational field, and as a skill set to bring it into these other areas of medicine, human factors, exponential technology, entrepreneurship, to bring that integrated, converge it all into this vision of Mars Academy USA. So here it's just slide, I'm going to go really quickly of just the idea of what is the vision and mission of MAU and other analog settings, because we're not the only one that is offering analog astronautics sort of experiences around the world. But what makes us different is that we've set up a framework where we can deploy our missions to anywhere, any place, anytime around the world. So then that you could see there in the top left, this is a very simple sort of a base camp that is made up of pods that is connected by small tunnels. But why this is a great idea is because now you can deploy it anywhere very easily. It's kind of like using the whole idea of like the military, right? You move in, you deploy, you do what you need to do, and then you remove and you quickly, leave and no footprint left behind. That is the concept of what we're doing. And I think that is very different from the other analog settings that are out there. But really, it is a laboratory. It's a laboratory out in the environment. And so what we've been doing the last 2 or 3 years since we started this organization is we've deployed different fidelity missions, training analog astronaut crew teams, usually from 6 to 12 people in the crew, and deploying them to various locations or various fidelities. And what I mean by fidelity is really, the risk that you are going to subject the crew under, and then the complexity of the mission structure that you've constructed, where they have to, live, work together and also do a lot of research, scientific projects, and also I think in this particular theme, being isolation, is what are the human factors? What are the psychological challenges that you are subjected to in isolation confinement environments? So just quickly, also what makes us different, I think, from the rest of the analog stations or organizations out there right now, is that we're also a actual curriculum. So we've developed, when you come into the mission, you don't come in with just, okay, you've got the facility or the place to do your work. You actually go to enter a full training program, a curriculum, what we've curated at the bottom. You can just see a very few example of some of the activities that you will engage in during the mission. So that's kind of like the background of what we've been doing and allowing us to develop concepts, ideas, take it into the next phase of rapid prototyping, you know, and then also, you know, the possibility of that being able to go into commercial, a commercial sector, and maybe be able to, not even just technology, but maybe a procedure that can help to one day maybe become a gold standard in what area that you want to do. So it's a really interesting vision and mission of what we do. At the same time, of course, it's educational, and it's really about offering the new 21st century of learning, experiential learning. But what also is different is that we also focus on exponential technologies. So those two things of experiential learning is the interactive, using the technology for us to, like, for example, here, now we're all interacting, but in a 2D way, but at least we're interacting remotely together.
Right.
But I think within the next few years, with the technology, that's where John's going to come in. He's going to talk more about augmented reality, spatial computing, how we're actually going to come in as avatars and not just being a 2D way of communicating, but actually being able to interact in a real virtual world and be able to, you know, be humanoid in our sensorium in this virtual simulation world. So with that said, I will move to the next slide. Next slide. Okay. I'm not controlling the slide, so can we move to the next slide? Thank you. Thanks so much. So this is a slide that's my background, but this one is showing you what we've done recently and pioneering an analog mission that is a station to station. And why are we doing this right now is because my sort of vision, or our vision, is really, you know, enabling humanity to become a multiplanetary species on the surface of an off-world planet. And so in this case, it's, you know, the closest planet per se is Mars. That is viable, I think, for us within our lifetime to go to. So we wanted to work the idea of having two maybe station on the surface of a planet. Of course, this is not on Mars. It is an analog out there in the Utah desert. And we're pioneering this sort of two base camps, two stations with two crews working together and being able to also look at the governance. So it's not just, you know, R&D in science, technology, it's also looking at society. How can you form for a new world, you know, a new paradigm of living, whether it's on Mars or here, even here on the pale blue dot of Earth, is how can we find a way to find a new way of living, to a new way of existence, and new models, new constructs. And so with this particular mission, and we're going to continue doing more of these station to station mission, is how do crews work together? You can then extrapolate this into how we live on Earth. Currently, how we live on Earth is full of borders. And that to me means separation. It means differences. It means borders of, you know, physical barriers, geographical barriers, borders, physical borders, psychological borders, financial borders, you know, all these things are borders that is a barrier. And so when we want to think about how we work collectively, you know, as a human race, do we have borders? If we have borders, it's going to cause a lot of separation, and it's going to be harder for us to be able to collaborate, be able to allow us to unite. So when we're thinking about space exploration, we also think about how can we, as a humanity, take this sort of environment of space, which is very austere, very dangerous, very unknown, and be able to take what the lessons we learn in space, all the challenges or the problems that we apply in a space kind of paradigm or a space environment, and solve those problems and allow us to think out of the box, because it forces you to think out of the box to find these solutions, then apply it to solve the solution, not only for space, but also bring it back to apply it to for life on Earth. And so, as you can see in this slide at the top, where this was a mission that was very focused on Mars medics, training medical crews. And these are made up of this particular crew here you see, of 12 people. They were an eclectic team of crew made up of non-medical and medical individuals, as well as individuals from many different disciplines. So it's using the whole new paradigm of bringing multidisciplinary, we call it transdisciplinary individuals coming together and allowing them to bring in all their expertise and knowledge and skills in their area, and then working together to solve these challenges. And below, you could see a lot of the activities we do in these missions. In these Mars Medics mission, we focus on many things like, search and rescue, bringing the technology we're working on. How do we conduct search and rescue on a planetary surface and an analog? But remember, this is on Earth, so you can apply it to disaster medicine. You can apply it to remote areas where there's very limited medical access or medical technology. So this, yes, it's thinking about for future, astronauts going into space, but also how can you relate it now? I call it the Earth shot. What we're thinking about, what we're developing for the distance in the future, that's the Mars shot. You bring it back to the Moon shot, and then you bring it back to the Earth shot. So the Earth shot is anything that we discover now, technology, procedures, whatever it is, can we apply it right now to, improve our life on Earth? So we do.
Let's not wait for the actual mission. Let's start working on these things now.
Okay, wonderful. And so we do search and rescue, we do medical triaging, and then we do evacuation. And we teach you, the crews, how to actually do telemedicine, teleanesthesia, telesurgery. And why is that important right now? Because of the pandemic that we're seeing, right? Where there's limited PPE equipment to be for the trained physicians, the ICU, the frontline medical health caregivers. This is where I think for what we're doing, where we're innovating to be able to use telemedicine, teleanesthesia, telesurgery, simulation training, then also technologies to enable, for example, 3D printing, which I'll show you, how we 3D print medical tools to be able to apply it to the Earth shot of now in this current pandemic that's affecting everybody. And so if we can move on to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be a delay. Okay, so before I go into a little bit of what this, give you some examples of the studies that we've been working on, this is where my passion is to go into austere environments on Earth. So we deploy these analog missions, specifically the Mars Medic training program, because obviously going to more riskier environments. Here you can see pictures of us deploying to 10,000 feet in Nepal, the Himalayas, to 15,000 feet. And we were going to go to Everest Base Camp, but it was just at the beginning of the COVID-19, just starting, and then there were some medical issues with some of the crews. But we are going to deploy to Everest Base Camp in 2021. But the point is that these analog environments of high altitude or extreme environments like Antarctica is because it has features, like I had said earlier, that is similar to the astronauts that are facing, and we're trying to develop the countermeasures of mitigation to be able to ensure that not only survive in these austere environments of space and then onto Mars, on Moon and Mars, but also, you know, how they can thrive. Because it's not just a matter of surviving, right? We want to be able to allow humans, astronauts, to be able to thrive in these austere environments. So going to, for example, going to high altitude. In high altitudes, you are subjecting the body that's not conditioned to high altitude. I'm sure Scott would love to hear his experience of, you know, how he's trained and then being up there for 1 year, all the changes physically and physiologically when you're in microgravity to the body itself, and how can you condition, or what are the risks you're subjecting your body to when you're in these austere environments of microgravity, or when you know, go into deep space eventually, when we go to deep space mission. But here in high altitudes, for example, is that your body is subjected, you know, to less oxygen. You're not conditioned to live in these conditions. So there is a medical condition that individuals are subjected to, and yes, risky because people can die, and it's high altitude mountain sickness. Why I'm emphasizing this is because there's relatedness to high altitude, or AMS, mountain sickness, to the current COVID-19 pandemic. Is because there is a condition that if you're not conditioned, if you're not trained, and you don't acclimatize yourself to these high altitudes, your body can be subjected to what we call HAPE, which is high altitude pulmonary edema. In a simple term, it means fluid in your lungs. Basically, you're suffocating, you're drowning. And once you get those symptoms, if you don't descend quickly, you will die. The prognosis gets, you know, worse and worse. So you need to descend. So with that said, with this idea of deploying crews, bringing in our technology, studying the medical aspect, to be able to, you know, see what are the challenges, be able to say what are some of these technology that can mitigate or prevent, or upstream prevention, is why we're interested in these high altitude, and also relevance, you know, for what's happening now. So next slide.
Dr. Abe Johnson, or Jewel, I don't want to totally interrupt you, but I also want to be cognizant of the time that we have left. Can I put you on pause for just 2 seconds and move on to John, and then come back to your presentation? Thank you so much. John, let's talk to you briefly about the work that you're doing and how it can kind of help us in the moment that we're having right now as well.
Yeah, great. I think I have some slides too for a little visual aid. The background here comes from a Mars Academy mission where we simulated doing using a mixture of a drone and some real-time guidance for people out in the field. So what we're working on here is called Avatar Medic. Dr. Jewel mentioned avatars. So before, let's take it to the next slide so that I can give us the quick overview of what the heck am I talking about when I talk about an avatar. It's kind of a weird phrase. So there's a new paradigm of computers that are available now. You may have heard of virtual reality before, where the whole environment is virtual. You might have played a game like Pokemon Go, where it's on your phone and you can see these things in the world. But what's a lot more rare, and what we're really interested in using, is what's often called a spatial computer, or sometimes mixed reality. And you can see from this graphic, you know, you're not in a fake world with an astronaut, with a virtual astronaut. You're not in a cell phone world with a virtual astronaut. The virtual astronaut is in your world using these technologies. So it's an opportunity for, then we go to the next slide, for us to use this for training, for first response, and disaster settings and pandemics, and take your pick. But the really exciting potential of this technology is that it's the real world, but with virtual elements. So that lets you train people for how to navigate real space, get used to operating in the confines or the expanse or whatever characteristics of an actual environment, but then giving us the flexibility to do any scenario we want at any time with really low cost, but extremely high possibility. We're opening up a whole new dimension of being able to train really complicated scenarios, even for regular people who wouldn't normally be able to get access to sort of government level multi-victim casualty I think on the next slide, I think there's a quick video that just shows this in action. So you can see that it's the real world, but with virtual elements. These are very cartoony elements. And the thing about we call it our holo triage because it's holograms and you're learning how to do triage. There's different fidelity levels to this simulation. You can use more cartoony graphics and kind of like here you see it's just quick touch and do the procedure. I'm listening and feeling for breathing, right? So then it gets up to the higher levels where we use more advanced graphics and more precise hand interactions and precise things. But this is a very unique thing. In order to do a scenario like it's being shown in this video, you would have to either have 3 mannequins or 3 people that are trained how to behave this way. So now we can instantaneously set up in a real environment these virtual elements and go around and work on them and basically, for lack of a better term, kind of gamify multi-victim casualty training. So you can see then you can integrate. So that's where the real med bag is. So you get people used to go look for the real supply in your real building, but don't have the cost of actually getting the bag out and doing this stuff. Don't have the cleanup, put the tourniquet on the leg. And so you see here, it's like you have this opportunity to bring people in at the abstract level and then a really clean progression all the way up. So this just keeps going. And obviously I save all these victims because I was the one who wrote the scenario. But that's the fun part about this too, is that then people who design these scenarios professionally get this canvas to be able to design scenarios. So we can move to the next slide. So I save his life. And so the idea here is that actually the screenshot on the left is on a mobile phone. This is bringing in training. You can do learning anywhere. And moreover than just kind of these prepackaged scenarios is the opportunity to bring in these characters that represent real people. So a real trainer, especially right now, this opportunity exists to do this in your living room and have somebody, a real certified trainer, watch you do it as an avatar and create scenarios for you to work with, but it's your real environment. So it's this mixture that's going to characterize the future of computing, where no longer is the computer something you use, it's actually something we're standing within, which is kind of a fascinating thing. It's as if you stepped into the world being understood by the computer. That's why it's called a spatial computer. So I think on the next slide, then we get into where this is going. So training is just one step. But when we go out to space, when we even go out to remote and austere environments, and even in my personal experience being a ocean lifeguard for California State Parks, there's only so much training that any given person can be given. And then you get out there in the world and you've seen something, you're seeing something you've never seen before. So what we can do is use these technologies to create a real-time guidance paradigm where you're able to coordinate the location of victims, you're able to coordinate all the assets needed and all the understanding. So this graphic is meant to illustrate that you've got your bird's eye view, you've got your triangulation, and you have a remote expert somewhere else who is able to be present with you and walk you through the process. They have all the information they need from the scene based on all the incredible sensors that are built into these kinds of devices. And then you have this fully situationally aware external person that can walk you through things. And if you ever had to have someone tell you how to do something on a computer or over the phone or over the radio, it's really frustrating. It's a lot simpler when you can use your human faculties, like walking over and pointing at something or drawing over something. And these are the kinds of opportunities that we have with this computer. So what we see, the vision here of Avatar Medic, and it's connected to the Mars Academy, is because we prototyped this with space in mind. Because first of all, Earth is in space. And I like to half joke that the middle of Kentucky can sometimes be similar to the surface of Mars, in the sense of your access to these medical capabilities is limited. It's just limited in places where we would so-called call them rural or whatever. In fact, 2 of our founding team members are surgeons, and they're very passionate about using these technologies directly in surgery. They're pioneers. And they often bring up the statistic that 5 billion people do not have access to surgery on the Earth right now. So if we fix this problem for astronauts, we're fixing it for Earth. And the opportunity is here not to build hospitals all over the world, but instead to create a paradigm where any medical procedure that needs to be done can be done anywhere, anytime, potentially by anyone, being guided through this kind of a paradigm. So our view is that in the future, responding to NASA's call for autonomous medical capability, every pane of glass, every headset, every pair of glasses, every helmet visor will know how to do medicine. And so anyone wearing that device or looking through that piece of glass will be able to get access to the avatar medic and have that ability. But if we go to the next slide, this technology allows us to integrate the visual component and the pathfinding component with the direct intervention component of robotics. So this is our rendering for the still freshly underway Avatar Xprize. And so this is a competition sponsored by the Japanese airline ANA, who did not know I don't know if they quite understood how forward-looking they were when they wanted to disrupt air travel as a paradigm, and instead give people the access to embody a robot somewhere else as their means of traveling. So rather than physically move their body, move their senses over somewhere else to a robot. So naturally, we entered this competition to create a Medinaut, an avatar medic, some platform which you can drive and interact with and feel as though you are situationally aware and present so that you can do medical intervention. So the first version of this for the Xprize will be like a rover, effectively, be able to drive around. We have some telemedicine capability in a simple way of the sort of tablet on the top there. But also if you're wearing these kinds of spatial computing systems, then you can do all kinds of projection with avatars and pathfinding. And the spatial computer really helps unify the robotic system with the ability to actually program it and manage it. So this is our way of also connecting the dots between having human operators, but then training these systems. Because the whole time we're doing all this stuff with Avatar Medic, a lot of it at first is going to be beaming an expert in somewhere. But each time you have the system learning what's going on, and it watches from real expertise. Because if any of you in the audience are familiar with like IBM Watson and these things, there has been a lot of promise, but there's a struggle when you try and teach a machine something just off of data or just off of medical journals and things like this. What you need is the machine needs to understand how to behave in space, and it needs to learn directly from experts doing these things. So we have an opportunity here to basically get the skills that are needed beamed out using humans. And then the whole time that operation is going on, the machines are learning, the AI systems are learning, what does a real person do? Where do their eyes go on a victim? How long do they linger? How do they approach this? I mean, there's just like an infinite amount of data that will be gathered by doing this. So then the sort of next slide is where our, as Dr. Susan would call our Mars shot is. So you can go to the next slide to see where we want to take this out of a rover and into the ability to solve the problems that we have where people don't have access to surgery and to other kinds of medical capability, being able to fly this thing out there. Okay, so it's a concept, there's a lot to solve. I'm loving the chat. I can see, that there are lots of problems to solve. But the core idea is, the core reality is that we need a way to get medical care to where it's needed, not always bring people back to hospital. We're seeing that especially now with COVID, right? We need to be able to interact with people where they are as for multiple reasons. They could be inaccessible, they could be infected in some way, or the hospital system can be overwhelmed, or there might not even be a hospital. So this is the opportunity exists to have a machine which will be able to do things like laparoscopy. Here you got here comes the little thing out here, right? We're going to miniaturize stuff like you may have heard of the Da Vinci robot and be able to bolt it onto a drone and fly it out to where it's needed. So trying to flip the paradigm so that make remote austere medicine as impactful and as powerful as hospital level medicine. So that's why it's our Mars shot. So we're taking it step at a time. The technology is still very new and in a lot of different dimensions, but this is where we see the future going in the 21st century, is that any medical capability, procedure, whatever you need at any time, anywhere. And that's how we're going to be able to go thrive out in the solar system. So the vision of Avatar Medic is solar system-wide medical capability. The operators of Avatar Medic, the AI software, the machine components, they won't care where they are. They'll know what's needed to operate, but they can be on a colony in Venus, on the surface of Mars, in the back alleys of New York. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
All that's needed, all that matters is that delivering the correct medical procedure. So this is the team. It's those two surgeons on the right are the world leaders in using this technology in surgery. We've got disaster medicine specialists. We've got parabolic flight trainers. We've got one of the audience members here on the right is here, an incredible innovator who has tools going up on the next Mars rover. We know we can do this. It's just a matter of the focus of saving lives using this technology. So it's a very exciting time.
If it wasn't cool enough to already be able to save lives, you get to wear some pretty snazzy looking glasses at the same time. Which is
I will
nice.
I will show you here. I will model the glasses. There you
John,
go.
that's pretty exciting. I want to move on to Scott Kelly, who has actually experienced isolation in space, and give him a chance to weigh in on firsthand experience, and then head into our questions as well. Scott?
Myself, I think you can hear me. How much time do I have? First of all,
you can take a little bit of time, and I'll cut you off when we're bored. How about that?
Well, what do you think?
I think like 6 minutes. I think 6 minutes. How about
6
that?
minutes. Okay, I will use 6 minutes. I'll be very respectful of everyone else's time here. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and appreciate being able to share a little bit of what I've learned in my experience. I've had the privilege of flying in space on 4 different occasions. My first flight was an 8-day mission to the Hubble Space Telescope in 1999. My second was 13 days, so almost twice as long. And that was a mission on Space Shuttle Endeavour to the International Space Station, assembly flight. I flew my third time on a Russian Soyuz and spent 159 days on the space station. And then my final flight was nearly a year, 340 days, launching on Russian Soyuz in March of 2015 and then landing nearly a year later in March of 2016. And, I know there's some tech people out there, if you were to graph those, you get like a second order polynomial. And if I didn't come up with that. Some smart person told me that. And if I was to fly a fifth time, my flight would be to Mars because it'd be like 5 years long. So, and that wasn't in the cards for me. So I retired from NASA. But on that third flight, the 159-day flight, I realized that being in space for 6 months in an isolated environment is not easy. It's hard. Being isolated and cooped up can cause you to be anxious. It can cause stress. And in the last third of that mission, I felt a little bit like the walls were closing in on me. And then when I got back from that third flight, about a year later, NASA started talking about sending 2 people in space for a year. Initially, I was not interested because I knew 6 months was a really long time. But, eventually I warmed up to the idea. I wanted to fly in space again. I wanted it to be more challenging than the previous flight. And I realized, well, what would be more challenging than spending more than twice the amount of time? So I agreed to do this. But I did it with a lot of thought. I put a lot of thought into it. And my goal was to get to the end of this mission with as much energy and enthusiasm as I had in the beginning. And I think there are some parallels here with what we are experiencing right now. We are all on this mission together. It is important. We don't know when it's going to end. I knew when mine was going to end, but it was so far away that I couldn't really see the end from the beginning. So I had to basically have this change of reference in my mind that this is now my home. This is where I live. I will not count the number of days I'm here. It will be over someday. And when it is, it will be great. I will return to Earth. And I think we have a lot of those parallels. So what did I do to get through this? With a better mindset than I had on a flight that was half as long, or less than half as long. I had a schedule every day. And we need to do that in this environment. Schedule when you're going to wake up, schedule time in the morning for your hygiene, your self-care, having breakfast, planning for the rest of the day. Schedule time at work. If you're lucky enough to be able to work from home, that's great, but you need to schedule it because you're waking up at work, you're going to sleep at work. You need to have a balance of your work and rest. Schedule time to connect with your family and friends over video conference. If you're on this call, you have that ability. That is so very important. Phone calls, email. My wife and I have found that we're connecting with people that probably maybe would have never connected with for the remainder of our lives because we now have the time, and it's important to do that, not just for you, but for the people you're connecting with. Know who you're in quarantine with. Everyone has different skills. Everyone is not going to handle this the same way. Understand that. Know your crew. Know what they bring to this situation. Help them, elevate them if you can, but understand we are not all the same. All astronauts are all the same. A lot of people were better at some things than I was. I was better at some things than them. So schedule and hobbies, a distraction, something that has nothing to do with your work or this pandemic. I think it's incumbent upon everyone to stay informed, but please don't binge watch the news. It is not helpful. It is not going to be good for your psychological well-being. Take care of your environment. I look at this situation like the space station. When you're isolated, your immune system is suppressed. Same thing here. We need to get exercise. We need to get outside if we can. We need to take care of our environment. I treat the front door of my house kind of like an airlock. And then, I don't have much time left. I got 20 seconds. So the last thing I want to say is, or the last thing I have time to say is, we need to get our information from trusted sources. At NASA, everything was not rocket science, but some of it was. And when it is, you need to go to a rocket scientist for your information, not your Facebook friends. They might be great friends, but they are not necessarily the smartest people on this issue. Trusted sources. So with that, ready for questions. And if I got a few minutes at the end for a little summary, I can do that too.
Thank you, Scott. We will definitely leave time for the summary. And I wanted to actually start our questions with you. We have a lot of questions from students, and I'm going to kind of combine a couple of them just for time. People are wondering Zoe from Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Lauren from Paris, France, are thinking about the future, how they can be astronauts, how they can be engineers. So they're wondering, what can they be doing in this time to really be preparing themselves for a mission to Mars in the future? What kind of activities would you advise them doing in their small habitat of today that'll help them in their small habitat of tomorrow?
Well, I think, I would give the same advice today for someone who wants to be an astronaut that I would have given, a couple of months ago. And that is, first of all, you got to decide, well, what kind of astronaut? Are you talking about NASA? You're talking about ESA? You're talking some future commercial program? You have to meet their minimum requirements. And, my assumption is their minimum requirements would probably be, especially for professionals, similar to what NASA has. And that is, bachelor's, or, I think they recently changed the requirement to a master's degree in some kind of technical field, science, engineering, some STEM kind of subject. So, you need that you need to meet that educational requirement. But I always tell people, choose something you like. I mean, don't become a military fighter pilot or test pilot like I was, because, you saw that work for me. You need to choose a field that you like, because if you like it, you're going to do better at it. If you do better at it, your chances are higher. Plus, the odds of becoming an astronaut, if you don't try, are clearly zero. But it's, at least currently, it's pretty challenging. So there are more people out there. Are people that are more qualified to do this job than I was. So, sometimes it's just, there are a lot of intangibles that will cause you to get or not get this job. And if you don't get it, you want to be doing something that you enjoy, because work is so important to our lives. But work that you can enjoy will make your life more meaningful, and it will also allow you to do better and help other people. So education, and then other experiences. There's so many qualified people out there that, on paper look great. And what separates them from others are doing the types of things that are analogous to living in space, demonstrating teamwork, leadership, followership, living or working in an extreme environment, showing some operational skills. I was on the selection board once, and I actually flew in space with a person like this. She was a PhD chemist. But what made her stand out was she was also a journeyman electrician. Like, she had an electrician's license. So those type of things make people stand out from the others. So, small bit of advice, but the biggest piece of advice is, if you don't try, you'll never get in.
Dr. Ipjul, you were talking about teams coming together and working together, and that's what Scott just talked about. Know your crew, know their skill sets. And what I really liked what Scott said is, like, be a leader, but also know how to be a follower. Do you have issues with that when you get these teams together and you isolate them? How do those first couple of days go when they're figuring out their crews?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, with everything Scott just said, with, what do you need to do to become an astronaut, if that's where you want to go with your career? I think everything Scott said, I totally concur with. I think also at the same time, you need to understand who you are. So the idea of being an astronaut to go physically out of space, you also need to understand the inner space of self. If you don't have that, and that's one of the major challenges that, in these missions that we've deployed, and I've been in over 20 of these analog missions of various fidelity. And I think there are lots of variation because, of course, it's the crew mix, right, that you form, that also is going to give you, every crew is different, the experience is different because of the crew mix. But the common denominator that I've seen with all these missions, analog missions, and maybe, Scott could give me some response or feedback, your experience, because you've been on multiple missions, is that the psychological issues. Right. If anything, I feel that I've seen for many of these analog missions is the limiting factor for defining, I think, to a large extent, a success or a failure of a mission is the human factors, the psychological issues. And if you don't fully understand yourself, how can you expect for you to understand to work with another human being? And especially in this isolated, confined environments for long periods of time. And for, Scott being 1 year on the International Space Station with all the physiological and the medical issues that, you yourself, your body is subjected to, it's like, if you don't really understand and have the tool sets, the skill sets to be able to understand who you are, to build your own resilience and self-empowerment, to understand where your weaknesses are and to acknowledge them, right? To say, what can I do to build those weaknesses that I acknowledge? But how can you acknowledge something if you don't even know you have that weakness? So you need to understand.
Dr. Ipjul, when you have these missions, do you build in that spirituality time? Graham was asking, do you build that into the schedule?
Yes, I actually, sorry that I went on for the first few slides, but I don't know if they can just quickly pull up the last slide, where we actually have the Astro Wellness program that's integrated into the training program. And it's really building in, the technology that we use for the crew. For example, we do body mapping, art therapy, which actually is a peer review clinical intervention that we use for certain patients that have depression, have PTSD. So you're using now this kind of art, music, dance, the creative side. That's why it's so important that you have in the crew, and we always ensure that there is a mix of individuals with the art side. So you need to be able to have people with the left side and the right side. If you
Right.
actually have worked both sides, you have the skill sets to use both sides of your brain, your hemisphere, to be an artist, to be also a very hardcore scientist as well. Bringing that in together I think, increases your chance to have a successful mission, but also for you to have a much better experience and learning. Because if you don't enjoy something, you're not
Right.
going to really learn it. You're going to not want to do it anymore. So
And
absolutely, yeah.
Scott,
Yes.
when you were debating about that, 6 months was already a little bit difficult. Now you're going to double that. Did you say like, okay, well, this time around, I really need to make sure I bring my show tunes, compilation, CD. Was there something that you thought, this is what I really need to take me and allow me to mentally, spiritually be on the right track to be there for so long?
For me, it was more about having the appropriate pace. And, because you're really busy on the space station
Right.
generally. I mean, sometimes it depends on how much science they have for you to do and how reliable the hardware is working. So it does vary somewhat. But for me, what was really important was striking the appropriate pace and understanding that, this is, I know it's cliche a little bit, but it was, the whole marathon versus a sprint thing.
Mhm.
And then also, and I think this is applicable in this environment as well, is that we have to make sure our weekends are different than the weekdays. So don't count the days up or down. If you think there's an end, you think you have an idea of when this might be over. If you ask me right now, I could not tell you how long I've been doing this in isolation.
Right.
Because I'm consciously not trying to think about it, because I have no control over it. I have no control over when this will be over. So it doesn't even enter my mind. But I think having a schedule that is different on the weekends, and for us, my wife and I here, what it amounts to is maybe a little bit of work, but it's also mostly taking care of our space, our apartment, doing the kind of the cleaning, just almost like we did on the space station. On the space station, bacteria, viruses grow quickly in microgravity. We have a suppressed immune system. So, I'll go around with the Clorox wipes and wipe down any touch things, anything we put our hands on, just like I did every single weekend on the space station for an entire year. So, so one of our weekend days is like that. The other day is the day to lie on the couch and watch Netflix all day. And if you have your schedule set up like that, you'll have something to look forward to. Every week, you'll be looking forward to the weekend, and then try during the week to do stuff that challenges you if you're lucky enough to work, but a variety of things. Maybe pick up a new hobby, maybe do some volunteer work if you can do that from home. A variety, a schedule that is, if it challenges you, then you will look forward to the weekends more, and you'll find that this time in isolation will go by much quicker.
And then you also know what day it is. You'll know what day is the weekend. That's a great idea. A couple of days ago, I had no idea what day it was.
If you ask me, was a year longer in space than 6 months? And clearly it was twice as long. But it seemed like I was up there a long time, but it also seemed like I was up there for a really long time for 6 months too. So it's important to have the right perspective, have a plan, follow that plan, and it will help us get through this.
Another question from Tuppa Sweeney for John. Tuppa Sweeney is wondering, through hollow triage, can we make a model of outer space and figure out the difficulties faced by the rover to land on celestial bodies like the South Pole of Moon or Europa?
Yes. So it's a great question. I think the reason why I wanted to explain about what spatial computing is because it's an opportunity, in fact, JPL uses it already to do those kinds of things, where you create a scenario that would be more dry. It would be sort of a data-driven thing. It would be something maybe you gamed out on paper or you acted it out together. And instead you turn it into an actual three-dimensional representation that you stand within, and that will interact with you and you can interact with it. So it gets us into that. The reason we're doing it for medical training particularly is because there are so many intangibles and unknown unknowns that you can actually encounter when you create these kinds of virtual worlds. And not just purely virtual worlds, but then when you try to make the virtual objects interact with physical, for example, let's say we'll test a rover. Well, the devices scan the ground. So you see how the ground is bumpy. Well, then the virtual rover is going to bump along the ground. So you could actually test a suspension system on real land, but it's a virtual object. So this paradigm of computing is going to change, and already is, the entire direction of engineering and design and planning and all these, basically everything humans do will be modified by this paradigm of computing. So those kinds of ideas are welcome. And what the Avatar Medic group specifically does is says, we have these engineering aspects, or we have these missions, and then puts the human factors in, and then makes it all go wrong so that you have to fix it when it's broken. And that's the really exciting opportunity of this. It makes intangible things tangible, and then you can do lots and lots of iterations for no extra cost. So it's a total game changer for preparedness.
Dr. Ibjul, those little pods that you showed us in the beginning, the ones that you could kind of connect with tunnels, are you ever concerned about the amount of space that the team is working in? I think of people who are living, and not leaving their homes, whether they live in an apartment or a house, and they're maybe feeling like the walls are coming in. Is there a space that you find is the right amount?
That's a very interesting question, and I don't know the exact, the right answer to that. But what I can say is that I think the fact that in this setup that you can expand or contract the space for the missions depending on the number of people, individuals in the crew, where you're going to go. I think that is the benefit of this kind of modular deployable system. But I think also we are very cognizant of taking care of the crew mental wellness and well-being, and that's something that we absolutely focus on to be able to ensure, as living in isolation and confinement. I'm sure many of us are feeling now cabin fever, and especially if you're living in a small space. If you're living in a house, at least you can move around much more. But if you're in a small confined apartment, you're probably starting to get cabin fever if you haven't ventured outdoors. So this is the same with these missions that we see the participants undergoing, especially when they're into the middle of the mission. If they're, that's when they're starting to get bored, or they're getting more, because there's more stress and it's accumulative over the days or the weeks. And so they have to learn how to manage their stress and all the anxiety and then, the physical environment. So what we do also is have an area where we call the Zen Area. And it's literally, where they can go, they have their downtime, they're able to either go to, if they want to go, with more than one person, but really it's just their own personal space, a physical personal space, called sort of kind of Zen Area, where they can go in and they can meditate. We have the technology where they can wear the VR, go into a meditative, simulation, or go into an environment where they can just relax,
Right.
and take themselves, not physically, but mentally, out of that in sort of, claustrophobic sort of
Right.
closing in
Go to your own
sensation of
corner.
the physical environment they're in. So
Yeah.
I think this is also, and I think people out there in their house, if you're feeling this cabin fever, it's very cheap actually to get a Google Cardboard now. There's so many online, sort of meditation apps that you can download even on your cell phone to even, enter into that virtual sort of meditative. It doesn't have to be meditation, it could be other things. You can go in and do yoga, there's apps that you can do. So we actually do yoga with VR and AR as well, where, because
it's like what Scott was saying.
and I'm
Remind
sure
yourself of what you like to do.
Yeah, you have.
So Scott, with that cabin fever,
really,
I mean,
at the end of the day is social.
Yeah, and Scott, we're talking about cabin fever, and if you're on the space station, you cannot go outside. There is no place to escape to. On the space station, do you have a place like Dr. Jewel is talking about, a safe space where you're like, I will need to be here for 5 minutes, leave me alone? Do you have a place like that, or the expectation is no privacy up there?
No, you have your crew quarters, which is a phone booth. Sometimes people don't know what a phone booth is if you're younger, but it used to be a place where you'd make calls. It's also similar to the size of a coffin, maybe, which is probably a bad
I was
joke.
thinking like an airport bathroom is what I was
it's
thinking.
airport bathroom size. Yeah, absolutely.
Airplane bathroom. Yeah.
Airplane bathroom. So yeah, you have your own space, and it's very important. And I think if you are quarantined with people, more than one person, not only is it important for you to share time together, it's important for you to get alone time. And if that means, having a schedule outside of one of the rooms in the house where people sign up for their alone time, I think that's important to do, because again, it's about like a variety of schedules, different things that you do, sharing time with people, connecting, but also spending time by yourself. On the space station, we also had this room with a bunch of windows called the cupola, which was pointing at the Earth, which was incredible. And I would imagine. And I used to do this on the weekends. When everyone was asleep, like on a Saturday or Sunday, I'd wake up and I'd listen to some like really good music and fly around the Earth once, just looking out the window the whole time.
That's pretty cool.
Unfortunately, I don't have that in Houston right now.
So what are you doing right now in your house while you're isolated in your house? Where's your cupola that you go and jam out?
Well, we're lucky in that we live in a high-rise apartment and there's a lot of windows, but it looks out at Houston, which now the air is a lot cleaner than it used to be. I used to think it was the humidity that was what I could see in the air, but clearly it wasn't. But we're lucky. We have, it's my wife and I, we have enough space. We have a lot of light in this apartment. We have exercise equipment. We have a balcony. So I know people, easy enough for me to say about telling people, what they should do in this environment, because I know everyone's situation is different. And, there are people out there that, they're not too concerned about being locked in their apartment. They're concerned about being able to pay their rent and buy food. And that clearly is a priority. So I get that. But I think, if you can, there are things that you can do to make your situation easier.
Sonya, may I ask Scott a question with regards to the continuation of the spiritual experience of being in isolation, and of course specifically there on the International Space Station? So Scott, did you experience the overview effect, the overview phenomenon, when you look back at the pale blue dot from the International Space Station, this kind of a transformative spiritual experience that the other astronauts have conveyed and talked about? It's be interesting to hear if you had that experience.
Well, it's not a blue dot. You're pretty close. It's a big blue ball.
Yeah.
I always wonder why somebody decided to name this planet Earth, which is kind of like means sort of like dirt. They should have named it Planet Water. And it's not pale either. It's a brilliant color blue, actually. The overview effect that she's referring to is this, when you see Earth from space, you get a better appreciation for the environment. Certainly it looks fragile. Our atmosphere looks like a thin film over the surface. See a lot of pollution in certain areas of the world. But also this idea that you realize that the 7.5 billion of us are connected in a close way. We're all on this planet that when you look at it from space, you don't see any political borders. You see continents, there are people there, they have challenges in their lives. And I think the experience makes you more of a, humanitarian minded person. And yeah, I definitely experienced that on, over mostly the course of my 2 long flights. Versus the shorter ones, because the shorter ones you're just so busy, you don't have time to think about anything.
Thanks, that's great. Thanks.
That's a great concept of not seeing the borders, not seeing the separation, and it's kind of what we're all experiencing a little bit right now while we're quarantined and we're isolated. We are isolated together in a very strange sort of sense. A lot of us are going through the same thing that's happening in Italy or Japan or China even. So John, how could we use technology to maybe bring all of those people together? Should we be training up for the next crisis? Should we be using technology and AR and VR to be connecting right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, this is the unique thing about this, is that we're all connected here over this network. The internet gives us this new potential. It's a new layer to our existence that we haven't had before. So, obviously what me and the team are working on is getting us ready for, for more of this. I don't think it's not meant to scare anyone, but it is meant to understand that, I think to Scott's point is that, this planet, it's fragile, it's dynamic. Things are going to happen. And so I think the opportunity that we have with these technologies is to make intangible things more tangible before they become tangible, so that we're prepared. Training is everything. And the more people get access to training, the better. And also the more people who can coalesce, converge around problems, the better off that we will be. Trying to solve something totally on your own is really challenging. But being able to use these technologies and not just these high technologies, but even these mobile phones can do some of these capabilities. But I think what I'm seeing is the normal on the other side of this presents us an opportunity to make an improved world, a world where we're used to working together. We become accustomed to constantly interacting with each other, not based on like our culture or our border or location, but based on our capabilities, our interests, our shared desires. So it's there's a collaborative potential here that this kind of a technology really augments. I mean, if you've having the privilege of using these kinds of things, which are expensive and whatever, kind of like the first cell phone, they got a big pack coming out the back of it and all that. But these are coming. Within 5 years, these glasses will be a few $100s, and they will be everywhere, because it presents us an opportunity of letting the computer fade away, and instead the people leap out of the thing. When you've had a few avatar chats with people, totally different experience. You can see someone shift their weight, they look up in a way, they scratch their head, but you're standing there with them. So they walk around. I've had conversations with people as an avatar in multiple rooms of my house, and it was totally natural, as if they were standing there. But I had to remind myself, oh my God, this is a cartoon avatar. So the potentials are here to create a more connected world, but we're in this time where the technology is not widespread. There are these little viewer things, like, let me try and show this little viewer things that cost like $20. You can kind of take some time away for yourself. You can use some of these things. But I think really it's the mindset that I hope we will get into, is thinking all the time about how would I collaborate to make my world better? How would I learn something that I didn't know before? Because it's not a luxury anymore to have to use your leisure time to improve. Things are changing forever. They will never be the same, and they never are the same. I think Scott could tell us, watching a cyclone from the top above the planet will show you that dynamic, chaotic systems are what we live in. So being prepared is going to be the big thing. But I think it's that mindset of like, I want to be prepared. I am not bracing against the problems. I'm in my power, so that when problems inevitably arise, we'll just fix them. Or I think a physicist once said, all problems are inevitable, problems are soluble. And you just live your life, you just keep going. So that's kind of the, opportunity we have as a mindset. And then the technology is really going to rise up to support that mindset, So it's exciting as much as it is kind of anxiety inducing, but welcome to life, I guess.
Yeah, we've gone way over, so I want to wrap up with one more question from the audience out there, kind of speed round, if you will. Audrey from Nashville, Tennessee says, this is a question for Scott, but we're going to open it up to everybody. Scott, when you were on the International Space Station, what could you not wait to return to Earth for? What did you want to see or feel? What was the thing you were most excited to return for?
Weather.
Oh, just weather. Just that's
Well,
pretty
there
cool.
are other things, but I'm not going to mention that here.
It's a PG show. So okay, weather. So after this isolation is over, what are you most excited to experience?
I think one thing you miss in space are people, relationships, the people you love, your family, your friends, that in-person contact, and also nature. So again, I think there are a lot of parallels in this situation as being in isolation in space. So I think that's what I'm going to look forward to is getting back to a normal life someday. Maybe not exactly the same way as it was, but being able to interact with a large group of people will be great, and being able to freely go outside when you want and do what you want.
John, what are you looking forward to when this is all over?
Coffee shops.
Nice. Dr. Ipjul, what are you looking forward to when this is all done?
Just to really be able to relax out there and feel the air, the wind, and the smell of nature. So absolutely,
That's great. Scott, you said you wanted to wrap this up. I'd love to have that happen. And then if we still have time and people available, I know I asked Dr. Ipjul to pause. So why don't you officially wrap us up, and then we can do an appendix with the remainder of the doctor's.
Yeah. So I got to jump off here.
Yeah.
I actually have something right now, but so the one thing I just wanted to say is, this is a challenging time. I know there's anxiety, there's fear. I've always found with fear, and astronauts get scared, but I always found with fear was we need to recognize what we have control over, and in this situation, there are things we have control over: our environment, our schedule, how we take the guidance and respond to it, and how we are as teammates, because we're all in this together. But then there's stuff we have no control over, and trying to separate yourself from that, I think, will alleviate some of this anxiety that people feel in this situation. We're going to talk about the overview effect and looking out at the Earth. It makes you realize that we are all connected. And now, with this virus, we're all connected, for better or worse, even more so than I actually believed. But, if you consider the last pandemic, 1918, 100 years ago, and what we've accomplished since then, technology development, we live in a completely different world due to our ability to adapt, due to our intelligence. We've had people on the moon. We've had people living in space for 20 years on probably the most complicated thing we've ever done. We built that space station while flying around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour in a vacuum and extremes of temperatures, plus or minus 270 degrees, built by an international partnership, 15 different countries, languages, cultures. If we can do that, we can do anything. We can solve this problem. But it's going to take all of us working together, following the guidance, doing the right thing. And I know that people on this call, because you're motivated enough to be on this call, you will be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So thank you for that. And thanks for your time. Thanks for listening to me. Unfortunately, I'm going to drop off now.
Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
If people are still on and able,
thank you, Scott. Live long and prosper.
To Dr. Ipjul for your appendix to this. And John, I think you had some additional slides. If you wanted to add anything to the end, we'll try and leave time for that as well. But just to be aware, we have gone over our time, so we may have fewer audience folks. So Dr. Ipjul?
That's wonderful. I'll just breeze through the rest of the slide. It's really very focused on us due to examples of some of the studies. So maybe if we can pull up some of the rest of the slides from the presentation, I can talk a little bit more about the teleanesthesia, telesurgery work that we've been doing in the last couple of years. But here's a slide of us actually going up to high altitude here in Nepal, in the Himalayas. We're at 10,000 feet and 15,000 feet, so it's a mixture. And this particular upper left one, we had to have a chopper to take us up to ascend for the final acclimatization, ascend to our final destination, is because we were right in the middle of a monsoon season. Started rain continuously, and so we were not able to, to physically trek the final ascent to the base camp. But you could see here that in these very austere environments of high altitudes, we were subjecting the crew to a lot of the environment itself, but also to develop the technology and in the telemedicine and in search and rescue and medical triage. And the crews, remember these crews are non-medical with medical people as well, so it's a mixture. So the crews, we did that intentionally because we wanted, well, one, to ensure that we have medical doctors in the mission as well, to make sure that in case there is a medical emergency, that we have the medical care there. But also we wanted in our studies to answer the question is, can you teach non-medical trained individuals, the general public with no medical background or minimal medical background, to be able to learn basic medical skills, right? So that's why we have, but before you can even go to these mid and high fidelity, you have to have at least trained in the low fidelity mission. So next slide. I think we're frozen in this slide. Next slide.
Why don't you speak about it?
Okay, so this is just an yeah, sure. So I can't remember which actually what the next slide is though. But yes, okay. So this is really a God's eye view of what we're doing in these Mars medic missions, and also in the general missions that we deploy, is really to be able to integrate a lot of the space assets, the biomedical wearables, technology, rovers and drones, as John was talking about, and integrate it into a continuous kind of training where if you have an injured astronaut or injured individuals in remote areas, or here of course we're showing it on surface of Mars, is how can you do a rescue to be able to bring that individual, the injured victim or the astronaut, back into into a medical facility where you are able to at least to do some medical intervention. So there's talking about bringing in the rovers doing the search and rescue, using drones, using satellite GPS to be able to pinpoint where exactly is the injured astronaut. The injured astronauts themselves will be wearing biomedical devices, so you can track them. You can do real-time biometric continuous monitoring of their condition, and so on and so forth. And then allow also the search and rescue team not to get lost and injure themselves, right? To complicate the situation. So this is a real sort of like a summary in one slide of what we're doing and what is needed, not only when we go onto a planetary surface, but here in remote areas when there's a disaster, when there is limited access to the environment to save the individuals, if there's an earthquake, there's fire, and all these things that actually happen on Earth, where you need to be able to rescue and to medical triage and evacuate to get help for the injured person. Next slide. So the next slide, I think, is showing this whole idea of what we did first, testing of developing teleanesthesia, telemedicine, using telemedicine platform. And, specifically in the field of teleanesthesia and telesurgery, which is now very relevant with the COVID-19, is how can you bring in, using this sort of, telepresence platform or telemedicine platform, that basically the internet, to bring in people from different backgrounds, different expertise in the medical field to be able to help to not only train, but in the real life in the ICU, or maybe, in a medical clinic where they need experts and they don't have them there right now, but bring them in remotely via telemedicine, using what John was saying, using the technology of spatial computing, augmented reality, to be able to help give support to the medical team. So we did this very first testing. This is 2014, I can't believe 6 years ago, when we worked with, in this analog setting, worked with the station at Mars Desert Research Station up in Utah Desert. This is the non-medical crew, analog astronaut crew, and they were communicating with the medical team in Antarctica at Concordia Station, which is run under the Italian, French, and ESA, where they have crews live there for 365 days in a year, but 9 months out of that whole year, they have very limited, they're totally remote and isolated. So they have a full medical team there. So we worked with them to say, can they telementor to the crew in the MDRS station in the upper left, to be able to learn how to do intubation, how to do anesthesia, and then to do basic, medical surgical, training like suturing and debridement and things like that. And so here is really a setup where we use a high fidelity mannequin in the analog station there in Utah. You can see that. And then they were overseen by the men and trained and mentored by the medical crews to be able to actually, move them through step by step the protocols and procedures to do intubation and to do, anesthesia training. And it was really pretty successful. And in the last 6 years, we've actually iterated, expanded on this training and to incorporate the technologies that, we were just mentioning. So next slide, please. So I think this next slide is where I think is fascinating. The whole idea of 3D printing is to be able to now open up the portal of us literally being able to really do surgery or to live in space, to live in austere environments, because 3D printing is an old technology. It's 30 years old, over 30 years old, but now it's in commercial availability. And the fact that you can 3D print, and we have a 3D printer on the International Space Station, but you 3D print and that's great. You can 3D print things, but then what is an actual application for 3D printing these tools? Okay, so in this case, an example is 3D printing medical tools and life support systems, right? When things break down, you 3D print it, you can fix it. Then the idea is then you can then melt it down, then reuse it again, right? So in this case, you see here what we've been doing with regards to actually training medical and non-medical crew teams, analog astronaut, how to do the anesthesia intubation, which you can see the relevance of that with the COVID-19 shortage of medical equipment, shortage of ventilators, and so on and so forth. So in this case, what we've done, and we're working with our partners, Dr. Ishikita Stoney, he's the inventor of this vapor jet. And this is really, really going to open up the idea of being able to do surgery in remote areas, to how to do anesthesia in remote areas in space and on Earth. So this vapor jet really is 3D printed. You send the files over, it 3D prints all these pieces, you then assemble it, and that's the vapor jet. But the vapor jet alone does not work. You need to then integrate it into the vapor jet system. As you could see, these crews, they're learning to do this 3D print, assemble the vapor jet, and then to learn the intubation, and then to, of course, it's with a mannequin and not real people because we're still under research and development. But this is really where I see this technology to enable us to actually to not only survive but thrive in space, because now that in any austere environment, the crews are going to be subjected to a lot of high risk for injuries, for medical life-threatening situations. So if you don't have the protocols, you don't have the capabilities to be able to even to do the interventions, then how can we really say that we can successfully move further out beyond low Earth orbit, which is where the International Space Station is, and to even think about settling on a off-world planet? So this is where the innovation is. But I think what's interesting is that this can also apply to life on Earth in remote areas or underdeveloped worlds where they don't have the access to medical care, where they don't have access to the medical equipment and the experts. So this is where I think 3D printing is changing that whole paradigm for us to democratize the ability and access to healthcare, to surgery, to also, allowing us to use these technologies to train more people, and I think is to me the interesting aspect the spin-off benefits. But at the bottom here, what we've done also is through MEU and through Matteo, who is with us with Avtomedic, and I've known him for many years, and he helped us to develop the, and is still under research and development, but the idea of a solar-powered portable 3D printer. Now, you think about it, a solar-powered portable 3D printer, where now if you don't have any electricity or source of power, but you at least have the sun, you have the solar power, now you can actually use the 3D printer, because what's the point of having a 3D printer if you can't use it because you don't have power? So now the idea of printing off-grid, you know, life support, not just medical tools, but anything you need, is, I think, the next layer of this innovation. And so that's what we've been testing as well. So next slide. So talking about what, you know, we've been mentioning is that in isolation is that you got to take care of the mental health and wellness and well-being of the individuals. You yourself, myself, being, you know, getting a little bit of cabin fever here, you know, being stuck in a small confined area of house or apartment, is that you've got living with other people as well, family, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and your pets, you know, is that it can give you a little bit, you know, I guess irritated, agitated at times. But if you have the skill sets, if you have the technology that, you know, that you could use to help you to maintain and even optimize your well-being, your mental health, that's really important to integrate. So this is what we study as well, because it's the human factors, the behavioral factors. Because when they ask us now, right, oh, you know, just like over the last few weeks or the last month, they say, okay, now you're stay at home, you can't go out, and, you know, they expect you to just be confined in your house environment. But behavior changes, takes time. You can't force, so it's like involuntary incarceration is how I see it, right? Which is what we're under in a way, when you're incarcerated in some way, you know, I mean, not total incarceration, but you're involuntary because it's not, you didn't ask for it. So it's very different mentally, psychologically, when you have astronauts going into, you know, onto the International Space Station. They train for it, they volunteer, they want to do it. So there's a difference between wanting, volunteering to be in isolation versus something where currently that, you know, millions of people are confined to is isolated, involuntary. So there's psychological, you know, consequences of that. So here you can see, you know, how we deal with that to mitigate, reduce a lot of the, and maintain the wellness and look at, you know, the mental health of crews is we've used technology. And here at the upper left, it's interesting, we've used music, we use sound frequency. So here you see the astronauts all lying on their backs, but they're wearing their virtual reality goggles. And so, and then there's this person here, and he's using music and frequency. And so we all know there's actual studies that different frequencies of music and sound actually vibrates resonate at different, you know, different wavelengths, and frequencies that allow your body to either get agitated or can calm you down. So it affects the brain waves, you know, the alpha, delta brain waves that we all have. So this is the scientific, you know, to support the idea of using music and resonance and frequency. So in our mission, some of our missions, we've used the idea of using frequency, music, and then having the crew wearing a VR simulation where they can enter into some calming, you know, environment, whether it's the ocean or going into space, right? They get to see that, so they get visual stimulus, they get the audio from the music, but they also get the vibration of the frequency that is emanating out from the device. The other one is meditation. As I said, we also use meditation, and this is the, you know, the idea of using the VR, and we have the yoga and meditation that's programmed into the VR, and they can go and do meditation individually or as a crew. And I'm going to say, you know, this has been the last few years been doing this, and the result is really pretty positive, where it helps the individuals and the crew to cope for bonding, cohesion, and also to work more effectively individually, because they're more grounded, and their mental wellness, their cognitive wellness functioning at a higher level, because obviously, when you're challenged, you're super stressed, all these things, your environment, yourself, and diet is important as well. You have a good diet and fitness, physical fitness. When you have all these together, these tools to help you, then it allows you to at least be able to cope very well with the environment in isolation. So here we also have a robot here. I'm having the nail robot. This was, many years ago, wearing the EEG headset because we want to monitor the brain waves of how I'm feeling. It's kind of part of the biometric data that we're collecting. But the robot it was pre-programmed to be our trainer as a yoga. I couldn't find the picture, but also it was a companion. So the idea of isolation, and this is where I think John could talk a little bit about bringing in robotics and to be your companion, to be somebody that can be your confidant, to be able to, you can relate to. And it could, this is very crude early stage of bringing a robot, but eventually, and this is what the Xprize is doing, is being able to use haptics, wearing haptic suits that has haptic biosensors incorporated into it, and then you're able to now have the full sensorium inside the robot that you can really interact with. And then you can feel like the person or the robot is more humanoid versus something like this, which is really, this is early stage concept. And so meditation, and here we also bring in martial arts and arts and so on and so forth. So a lot of this is part of the wellness. And last slide is something I feel like this is body mapping. And so this is my last slide. I think everyone can do this. Even right now, whoever is still part of this this conference tele session, you can do this right now. Just do body mapping art, and it's a therapeutic intervention. It's a clinical peer review intervention that's currently used as a way for patients that are terminal, for patients that have depression, mental illness, to be able to cope. And using a non-verbal way, which is art, to be able to communicate your state of being, the 3 Ps, which stands for your physical expression of self, your physiological, your psychological expression of self in a non-verbal way. And it's kind of like taking an X-ray, and taking your biometrics when you go and see your doctor. They just take your blood pressure, respiratory, your temperature, but it's only a snapshot of that moment in time. So this represents a visual, artistic way of being able to represent the individuals in the crew when they're in isolation at that moment in time. You timestamp it. But what's so really, I think, is great about this way of looking at the individual and yourself and sharing that is the fact that you can express yourself, and you can do it, as you can see, the crew are working together. So it's a social interaction activity. It's also a way for you, if you don't know or you don't want to express it verbally, or you can't express how you're feeling, now you can do it in a non-verbal way, in a visual way. And so this is what we do in our crews. We obviously collect the data, but here are some of the body maps for some of the crew members. And it really, you could see, it's on the body map, they express in their own way. They can use any kind of creative tools. They don't need to use crayons. They could use, glue and, crystals, anything like that. But expressing, if they're happy, if they're sad, if they're feeling hot, if they're feeling pain. This is a great way. And so, everyone can do it, and then you have a creation that you're really kind of proud of. You can share, take a snapshot and share it with everyone. So
excellent.
So that's it. That's kind of the rest of my slide.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
John, did you want to wrap anything up briefly?
I'm fine. It's been really fun sharing with everyone. I was maybe curious if there were any lingering questions that I'd love to try and answer.
I know that we're gonna also share the questions with people, and possibly there's a way to send you questions, and possibly use the technology that's out there using social media to to get any additional questions asked, but we incorporated a lot of them into our existing conversation. And I know you also touched on the lag, which is a concern, especially when we talk about technology, the lag time between here and Mars.
Yeah.
And the many minutes. You touched on it briefly. Can you just give us maybe a little bit deeper of an answer briefly?
Yes, I will. That's just great. I wanted to talk about this. So yes, it is a reality. Light takes time to travel, but what we can do is solve it from a design perspective. AI is brought up a lot. AI at its simplest way is a decision tree. If this, then that. If this, then this. Else this. Is in its simplest way. So even being able to define whole blocks of intelligence and then send that, so that when it gets somewhere, they aren't hearing you like we're hearing each other, where it's like totally sequentially. Instead, what you're doing is sending blocks of intelligence or blocks of procedure, and then they get those, and then that gives them enough time. They've got 8 to 20 minutes worth of intelligence, and while the remote team is crafting the next block. So you can already do that in an existing way. It would have been great to hear Scott talk about that, because I think that's similar to how you have to approach it. But then in the deeper future, you're starting to have the ability of these systems that will learn on their own. So there is going to be a way. And I do want to touch on something that I'm sure particular people in the audience might find questionable, but there is the possibility that in the deeper future, we may be able to find some ways around some of this time delay. But until that day, until we can find some ways around that, yes, we'll have to approach it with, it's like you're sending little mini instruction manuals kind of that are contextually relevant. And then the systems will get smarter over time.
Well, thank you so much to all of our participants, Dr. Susan Ipjewel, John Hanachek, and of course, Scott Kelly, who was with us previously. And of course, all of our folks who were online watching this wonderful conversation. It was over 150 people at one point, if not more. That was just the one time I happened to look. So thank you so much for joining us. Back over to our friends at the Mars Exploration Organization. Thanks for doing this and for these weekly ways of checking in with each other.
Thank you so much, Sonya. Thanks to all of our guests. And
Thank you.
no, it's really exciting. And I've been trying my best to answer as many questions over there as possible. Mainly, we just want to say, keep tuned in. And if you haven't read, many of your questions did have to do with the VR aspect of telemedicine and what analogs are. We're going to try to answer those. And if you haven't read Scott Kelly's book, Endurance, there is a young reader's edition for kids under 18. There's also the adult version, Endurance. I think he will answer a lot of questions about isolation. There is a point where he's really missing his kids on Earth. There is a point where he's like, I'm a little tired of freeze-dried food. So if you haven't, maybe this can be part of your managing isolation in space, is ordering this up on Amazon tonight. Most of all, keep tuned to the newsletters we send out. We're going to let you know what's coming up next, and join us next week for Drinks with Explore Mars next Tuesday night. And just, again, pay attention to your email. But now is the time for you guys to all take a deep breath as we collectively breathe, for those who are struggling wherever you are in the world tonight. So thank you, and may the force be with you, and live long and prosper. Thanks, Sonya.
Have a good night.
Live long and prosper. Thank you so much.
Never give up. Never surrender.
That's right. Never, ever. Thanks, everybody. Have a
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.